was on the college cross-country team. I was getting A's in all my classes.
Yeah.
I was succeeding. Well, everybody was prescribed Effexor. When I got to this point with that prescription drug, things started going downhill very quickly. I began having shortness of breath, severe insomnia. I would be so sick, the brain zaps, the dizziness, nausea. I would have conversations with them with no memory of it in the morning. Extremely high blood pressure. When that started, it became so severe that I stopped attending my classes. I ended up dropping out of college. It altered the entire course of my life. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say it destroyed my life.
Hi everyone, welcome to our channel rxpilld, where we talk about dangers that revolve the pharmaceutical approach of medicinal treatment. When we're talking about allopathic medicine and the dangers and the risks that are associated with exposing yourself to these dangerous and sometimes devastating medications. Unfortunately, a lot of the truth revolving these drugs will not be openly shared with you by your physicians. We find it that the best way to release this truth to the public so people can be aware of this is talking to people who experienced these drugs firsthand on themselves and can tell you what they've had to undergo because of that decision to put their trust in their doctor's hands. So right now with me, we have Sarah Wheaton. She has quite the story to tell us. First of all, Sarah, hi. It's nice having you here.
Hi, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for coming. It was you were the first person who reached out, so I really thank you for that.
I'm very glad to have the chance to tell my story.
I can understand that. I did an interview before myself with another channel after this happened to me, and I felt very compelled to speak up. So I can understand that. First of all, if you can tell us just a little bit about yourself, if you want, whatever you want. Of course, you don't have to expose everything, but how old are you? Where are you from?
I am 38 years old. I live in the US in Connecticut.
In Connecticut.
I have a daughter who's 17. I live with my boyfriend, and I'm currently unemployed due to things that I've gone through.
I understand that. When was your first experience basically with the medical establishment? When did you first what was your first impression with doctors that you remember that led you down the path where you are at now?
Back in 2000, I was a freshman in college.
Okay.
And I was experiencing mild anxiety, little trouble sleeping. So while I was on a break, I went to college in Vermont. So on a break, I came back, I saw my doctor, just a primary care in Connecticut, and he prescribed me Effexor and pretty much every benzo there is, when one didn't work.
Okay, can I so right here what we were just bringing up, what you're talking about is something very very concerning to hear. So basically we're talking about what you were in college, a freshman, as you said, and you were experiencing stress. What were you stressed about? Can you remember what was kind of going on in your life?
It was nothing serious. I was away from home for the first time. My parents had recently gotten divorced. So I think that kind of mild anxiety was leading to me having some trouble sleeping. It was really nothing serious, but that I felt uncomfortable. So, there's a pill for everything. So my whole life, you go to the doctor, he has something that fixes you. I thought it would be a good thing. I thought it would be helpful.
So basically we're talking about a situation where we have just a complete normal human response to a life circumstance. So if anybody is in that young age of 20, I remember when I was 20, and things happen, big changes in your life. You leave home, you go to college, your parents might go through a divorce. So these things cause stress in people, right? These things naturally make a person more distressed and not feeling in the best place that they could, right? So this is not something that is pathological. This is not a mental illness of some sort. And yet you went to your doctor and you just told them, listen, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling stressed out. And he said, well, what exactly, how did that conversation go? If you can tell us, please.
You know what? I can't quite remember. I did later find out that this doctor, I mean, he was a great physician. I really liked him, but everybody in my immediate family and some family friends all saw this doctor. Well, everybody was prescribed Effexor at the same time, for various reasons. And so I don't know if it was the drug reps pushing it, if it was new back then. We all ended up on it.
So just for people who don't know what Effexor is a drug called venlafaxine. That's the actual chemical compound, the name of it. And it's a serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor. Basically, it's quite a potent drug, and it's used to treat major depressive disorder, okay, or people that suffer from generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, social phobia, chronic pain. Sometimes we use it, but it's a drug that can have serious side effects. Let me ask you this. Did you suffer before that period in college? Did you have major depressive symptoms before that?
I was actually a straight A honor student. I was a varsity athlete. Really, I was set up to be successful in life. And when I got to this point with that prescription drug, things started going downhill very quickly.
We're talking about a patient that comes to a doctor with no prior history of severe mental health issues, no self-harm, no suicidal ideation or things like that. You explain to your doctor, I'm stressed, I can't sleep, this and that, and then just this Effexor venlafaxine prescription.
I started not being able to sleep, the severe insomnia. Also, during the night, I was getting I would wake up with this agitation and restless, like restless leg syndrome, but it would be in my arms, my legs. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know that it could have been a side effect of the medication. So I called the doctor and he said, oh, you must need a higher dose. And so that's what I did.
How long after you started the medication did you start experiencing these effects? And also, when you were sitting with them first being prescribed, did he warn you about anything?
No, absolutely not. So yeah, he upped my dose and suggested to me that it was whatever, the anxiety. He did tell me I was depressed. I was in no way depressed. And these symptoms started. When that started, it became so severe that I stopped attending my classes in college and got into this period of just not sleeping, being incredibly agitated.
To make it clear, before the Effexor, even though you were anxious and you were struggling a bit, you still attended class. You did what you needed to do, and then after you started,
I was on the college cross country team. I was getting A's in all my classes. Yeah, I was succeeding.
And then basically after that decision to go on the Effexor, all of a sudden you're saying things get out of hand.
Yeah. And I did not connect it to the medication at all.
So he upped your dose, and did he add another drug to the cocktail?
He tried all the various benzos. None of them were effective. He added Ambien, which was no good for me. I would wake up in the middle of the night, go do things like smoke a cigarette, eat a bowl of cereal. My roommates were still up. I would go have conversations with them with no memory of it in the morning. It was very strange.
So so your roommates would tell you that you would be having conversations, these episodes, And you
Yeah.
just have no recollection of these
Yeah.
events.
I would wake up in the morning and there'd be a banana peel on the ground. And I've since heard that people do things like go out and drive their cars, things that are dangerous. Luckily, I didn't do anything that severe, but.
Yeah.
And then to add another drug, he gave me Flexeril for the restlessness in my body. That actually made it worse. And I realized that very quickly, so I stopped it.
So you had your suspicions that these drugs perhaps are not really being any providing any real benefit to you and actually derailing you from your course.
Yeah.
Your path.
And then probably within that first year that I started the Effexor, I decided that I wanted to come off of it.
Okay.
And there was no recommendations for taper back then. And when I started getting the withdrawal syndrome, which is now recognized, the doctors would say there's no such thing. I think they called it discontinuation syndrome. What we now know is the brain zaps and all of that stuff. It was terrible. So I just ended up staying on the Effexor.
And basically, he did not tell you, he did not give you any instructions on how to stop the drug. And he also didn't recognize that these withdrawal symptoms occur after cessation of treatment.
No, he did not.
And
he actually told me there was no such thing.
So what did he tell you? What was his answer? You're just going crazy. You need to stay on this drug. That's what happens when you stop it. Like.
Yes. Yeah.
Almost.
So then it gets worse. I started having what I now know is myoclonic jerking, my arms and my legs. So I ended up seeing a neurologist who diagnosed me with restless leg syndrome and put me on a Parkinson drug called Requip.
Okay. Did he, when he was making an anamnesis and investigating you, taking your medical history, did he ask you about the psychiatric medications that you might or might not be taking?
I can't specifically remember, but I'm sure he did.
And he did not attribute any of the symptoms that you're experiencing to exposure to these compounds?
No.
Yeah, it's almost, I just have to say, to reinforce what you were just stating here. Again, this is basic medical investigation that should be done. The problem is, from my experience going through medical school, is we don't discuss in great detail the effects of these medications and how to spot for them properly. And usually when you go to your physician because you're having trouble, a lot of them will kind of dismiss the idea that the symptoms that you have are as a result of what you're taking, right? Which would make perfect sense. You're taking a foreign substance, you're putting it in your body. This is a substance that is known to interact with your cells in your body, in your brain specifically, in your nervous system. It does not take a rocket scientist, right, to understand that perhaps it could be responsible for these nervous issues that you're experiencing. And yet, no acknowledgement, and put her on another drug.
Yeah.
Put her on another drug. So we gave her a drug, caused her this symptom. Great, we have a drug for that as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. So please, I'm sorry for cutting you off a lot. I'm just reinforcing the things that you're saying because you're making pretty important comments here. So yeah, he put you on a drug for Parkinson's, you said.
Requip. Every time I would be laying down and stand up, I would get extreme dizziness and nausea and vomit. So I stopped taking that pretty quickly.
Okay. What from there? What happened after that?
I ended up dropping out of college. I couldn't pay attention. I was just so physically uncomfortable. I just couldn't do it. And I had been a student who had excelled in school my entire life. So it was very unlike me.
And all of a sudden, after a year on this Effexor and then going to the neurologist, getting the other prescription, just couldn't handle these issues, right? Am I right?
Yes.
Back then, did you ask yourself, what is going on? Am I going crazy? Are these, is this
That's pretty much what I thought. I still had trust in all the doctors that I saw. So I have to say, I didn't connect it in my mind that it was the medication harming me.
Yeah. It's a common theme. A lot of people, when they're on these medications, they get the narrative from the prescribing physician. They trust what the prescribing physician says. And they just sometimes don't attribute their health issues and their experiences to being on these medications. And it's something that if someone is watching this right now, whoever is watching this, listen to your body. I mean, you are the ultimate authority when it comes down to what is going on in it. You feel it, you sense it, you're intuitively connected to it. And some person, just because he has an MD title behind his name, it doesn't make him all-knowing and all-powerful. Unfortunately, a lot of times it's the opposite.
I realize that now.
Yeah, it takes unfortunately an experience like that to open you to that. But you're saying, so just to make this clear, a student never had problems with these issues before, had circumstantial stress because of events that happened in your life, that led you on a road of going on these medications that resulted in you dropping out eventually.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm very sorry.
So, thank you. The other thing I wanted to mention about the Effexor is that it has such a short half-life that if I would forget to take it by an hour or two, I would be so sick. The brain zaps, the dizziness, nausea. So that eventually led me to be afraid to come off of it, because at some point I realized that the withdrawal symptoms were going to be terrible.
Can you please go into more detail about what these symptoms are like, these brain zaps, all these things that you were describing? Because I think for a lot of people, they hear these words, right?
Yeah.
They don't really have a sense to the powerful meaning behind them and what they actually mean to. So I can say from, before I myself, if people, as they will know in this channel, I myself am a survivor of damage from harmful medication. And I remember, also as a student, when I was reading side effects, for example, let's say, okay, dry eyes or this or that, you don't understand or can comprehend the severity and also the effect, the suffering that it has on the individual experiencing these fancy names of side effects. So if you can please go into, if it's okay, go into some detail about that and what it is like to feel these things.
The brain zaps, what it feels like to me is that my body is standing still and all of a sudden my brain is spinning in my head. And I kind of get a vertigo, the nausea, and then the other thing that happens is the SSRIs have been kind of masking your emotions. And when that medication is removed, it's kind of like I would start crying out of nowhere, become extremely angry. And of course, that looks like to a doctor that the original symptoms they are treating you for are returning. So in my experience, their answer has always been, well, we need to up the dose.
So basically we're suppressing your emotions. And then once you start withdrawing from the compound and the system kind of tries to kick itself back in, find the normal equilibrium back, emotions kind of go haywire for a while. And then it's becomes also very convenient to point, oh, you see, you try to go off the drug, but you need it because you're going a little bit cuckoo here, you're getting angry, you're getting anxious. It's, that's what happens. That's why this drug is good for you, right? It's kind of, I'm sorry, effed up like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I ended up staying on the Effexor. I mentioned the restlessness and the agitation in my body. It got so severe that I couldn't go sit in a movie theater because I was moving all the time. It was so uncomfortable. I began having shortness of breath. It was horrible. I began having extremely high blood pressure, which I now know is a side effect. And I was very healthy back then. I was an athlete. I ate well. I don't have high blood pressure in my family. And it was so high that the doctor did the reading one time and sent me to the hospital for, I can't remember what test they did, but just to make sure that he was concerned for my health. So but nobody ever said this is from the Effexor.
So just to make it clear, we're talking about also symptoms while being on it, not only symptoms that appeared when you were trying to withdraw from it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, I see. So if I would ask you, I mean, when we make a decision, right, to take any drug, right, we always have to weigh kind of like they tell us to weigh the pros versus the cons, the benefits versus the dangers, the risks. What were the benefits? Were there any benefits from this from this exposure? Anything whatsoever?
From that point onward, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say it destroyed my life. I mean, it gets way worse from the part that I've told you. It's been years and years.
So when people are going through a stressful time in their life, go refer themselves to their physician to ask for guidance, ask for help, they need to realize, right, that they are in a dangerous situation because the whole
Absolutely.
The whole setting, right, is kind of disarming. It's your doctor in the right cloak. He cares for you. This is his job to care for your health, and it's all about getting you better. And it's actually very deceiving because, in fact, you find yourself in a situation where you need to make a decision that the consequences of it can be life-altering. And do you think people are aware of that?
No, that's what I was going to say. When I think about how many thousands of people have, just said, okay, my doctor prescribed me this, and are probably in the same situation as I am. It altered the entire course of my life.
And there isn't a black box warning on this drug saying, warning, exposure may alter the course of your life, or
no.
As you say, lead to their destruction. You don't get warned about anything like that, do you?
Absolutely not. No.
That's a problem. What happened from there?
Well, I don't know how much you want to get into this part, but the early 2000s were the advent of OxyContin. So I began experimenting with that. In hindsight, I realized that using opiates actually calmed the symptoms in my body. I did the detox and the rehab and all of that. And once you get into that setting, they just throw more drugs at you. I think they switched me to a different antidepressant, the gabapentin, Ativan. I can't even remember the whole list. But then they send you to see a psychiatrist who, they don't talk to you. You go in there and they're 10, 15-minute appointments and they write your scripts. I got put on Adderall, Xanax, which just created a whole another problem,
Yeah. So a whole just series of polydrugging, on and on and on. If it's all right with you, of course, I'd like to go in more detail with you on your journey through this. Of course, if you can stop me if something becomes too personal. It's important that people understand the actual toll that this has. So you were saying that you started medicating with opiates to deal with some of the symptoms. Is it okay if you can explain to us how exactly that started? The idea as well, and exactly how did you get to that path exactly?
Yeah, sure. Where I live in Connecticut, the town that I live in was just overrun with OxyContin. Oh, I had friends that were using it. My brothers were. I decided to try it. And, most people, they take opiates and, they get, sedated and, stuff like that. But it made me feel so much better from the symptoms that I was experiencing that all it did was let me live my normal life, do the laundry, clean the house, go grocery shopping. I mean, of course I was high, don't get me wrong. Yeah, I mean, I used that for quite a while. For a lot of people, the next step from there is to use heroin because it's cheaper. But luckily, I recognized the path that I was going down and got myself into a detox facility. From there, I did stay on methadone for about a year and then Suboxone. And during that time, the different doctors that treated me, like I already mentioned, just added more drugs and more drugs.
What was the
A lot of them addictive drugs such as Xanax, Adderall.
So wait, you came there having needed to self-medicate with opiates to deal with the symptoms that you suffered from as a result of previous exposure to psychiatric medications. And after that, with that history, doctors thought that it's a good idea to give you another compound that is addicting, like benzodiazepines, or for example, amphetamines like Adderall, you just mentioned.
Yes.
And what is the rationale? What do you think what goes through their mind when they encounter a situation like this?
Well, I began seeing a nurse practitioner when I decided to switch from methadone to Suboxone. The upside being you don't have to go to a clinic every day, you get a prescription. So I found this woman on a website, set up an appointment. She was supposed to be provide some therapy as well as the medications. So I started seeing her. She immediately, I should say, like I said, she's a nurse practitioner. So back then, nurse practitioners were not allowed to prescribe opiates and, controlled substances. So she worked under a doctor. I never met the doctor. She was in possession of that doctor's prescription pad, and she would just write prescriptions in his name. So within I think it was the first visit, she wrote me 30 milligrams of Adderall 4 times a day, which is a massive amount.
She wrote 30 milligrams of Adderall 4 times a day. And also,
you should have seen the prescription bottle. Yeah.
So what you're saying is also she obviously did this illegally as well. Like, wow, that's a ton of Adderall for.
Yeah. She also wrote me a prescription for Xanax, 2 milligrams, the long bars, 3 times a day. She didn't start with lower doses. And I was very young. I think I was 22 or 23. She kind of acted like she was my friend. I have a daughter. She would buy my daughter gifts. She would ask me to go out to coffee with her. And then eventually she would tell me, I have another patient, and this patient doesn't have health insurance and he can't afford his medications. Could you give me some of your Xanax and Suboxone and Adderall so I can give it to this patient? Now I realize she was most likely abusing that herself.
Oh, I see. My experience with Adderall, I was prescribed it as a child when I was 8, I think. And I had to take this drug for about 10 years every day. I remember, it started at 15 milligrams and then 30 milligrams a day. Yeah, that pill really screwed me up a bit. I remember being extremely agitated while on it, angry. I had no appetite whatsoever.
I lost so much weight.
Yeah, I was extremely skinny. Yeah, I was not a happy kid on it. I remember before that drug, I was really talkative, maybe too much in class. But, it's expected from a lively, happy child. A normal kid won't like to sit in the normal class setting.
Exactly.
And get bored to death. Parents, when they took me, and this is my dad and mom, they told me this. Because, look, they just want to help their child, right? Because I'll tell you, my story is my older brother is on the autistic spectrum. And that was quite traumatic for my parents. And they wanted to do everything so-called right with me, and that I'll turn out okay. And they trusted the system, because we also had doctors in the family. And when they went to the pediatrician, she told them, it would be child abuse not to put him on Adderall. It would be child abuse not to medicate an 8-year-old child with amphetamine. So, yeah, these drugs are definitely, it's a crazy approach. And why the hell, can I ask, why the hell did she give you Adderall? What was the reasoning for Adderall?
She suggested that I had ADD, the non-hyperactive kind. Now, meanwhile, as I said before, I was a straight A student. I didn't have any of those ADHD symptoms. So I don't know.
It's kind of a shocking story, because we're also talking about someone in the system also abusing it in a completely criminal way as well.
Yeah.
And were you still on the Effexor throughout the entire time?
I can't remember if I was on the Effexor or a different SSRI. I believe I still was on the Effexor.
Okay. And where we're talking the timeline here. So we were talking about you were 20 when you were taking the Effexor and all that. A year afterwards.
I was about 18 when I started the Effexor. The story I just told you about the nurse practitioner, I was probably 22 or 23. At this point, I started having, I mentioned the myoclonic jerking.
Can you explain it to us more, to people who don't understand the terminology?
It's kind of like, when you're falling asleep sometimes and you feel like you're falling and your whole body jerks.
Yep.
It's kind of like that, but it would be in one arm like this, or a leg, or, stuff like that. It wasn't painful, but it was embarrassing. And I was still seeing the neurologist, and he thought it looked like seizure activity. Then we added anti-seizure medication to the whole mix. First I took Topamax, then I took Keppra, and I think that was it for quite a number of years.
And you were on these drugs for this time period?
Yeah. So it kind of stayed like that for quite a number of years. It didn't get better, but it didn't get worse until I was, I got off of the maintenance medication, the Suboxone, and, kind of put that behind me. When I was about 33, I began drinking heavily to fall asleep at night. I was convinced I wouldn't, because of all the insomnia, the jerking of my muscles, the agitation, I was abusing alcohol, and that was the only way I could fall asleep at night. At this point, I had a very good job. I worked at a huge hospital. I was an account manager for the whole security department, but I was drinking. Not at work or anything, but at night to fall asleep. So I ended up going to a rehab facility for that, where they, of course, added more medications. They put me on gabapentin and Latuda. When I started the Latuda, that was my first experience with EPS symptoms.
Those who don't know what EPS means, it's extrapyramidal. They can be very debilitating and also last a lifelong.
This was a 3-week rehab place. I started the Latuda, and I didn't know what EPS symptoms were back then. I just remember getting like this terror and worse agitation, and I just felt like I needed to leave. I wanted to run away. Like, I don't know why. It was, now I know that it was mild akathisia. I wasn't aware of that back then, so I continued taking the medication. When I left the facility, they had referred me to, she was a physician's assistant for therapy and medication management. By the time I got to her, I started having blurry vision so bad that I couldn't see my phone to write a text message. The jerking, the myoclonic jerking was getting worse. Extreme panic. I wasn't sleeping. And when I did sleep and wake up, it was just like this adrenaline rush or something. You know, it was terrifying. The physician's assistant decided that those were psychotics. So she added Geodon, Remeron for sleep. It just got worse and worse.
But how many drugs do you think were you on the same time during that period where you were experiencing these severe symptoms?
Probably about six.
Probably about six
at the same time, yeah.
Just to clarify for the viewers, you're using some terminology again that people may not be familiar with, like akathisia. So we're talking about a disorder of the movement, basically, when you feel this restlessness, like you can't stay still all the time, right? And the limbs are affected, the legs are affected, and people fidget, they rock back, forth, they pace and place, just feeling uneasy in the body. And this can be really, really distressing, right? Am I kind of getting
terrifying?
Yeah.
Terrifying, yeah. So due to everything that was going on, and I didn't connect it to the medicine back then, but when I would be at work in my office in the hospital, I couldn't sit still. You know, it was so uncomfortable, just this feeling of terror. And I began missing work. So I ended up losing that job. That was really the beginning of the real downhill in my life.
So when you started using the alcohol to get better sleep, and this is something, by the way, that a lot of people that find themselves injured by pharmaceuticals or sometimes other life-altering injuries, you try anything, right, to just make it through another day, right? Because I think a lot of people are too easy to judge. They don't understand how profoundly debilitating it is to have to go through these symptoms. And I remember when I got hurt by isotretinoin, and I was at kind of my worst, I'd do anything just to be able to sleep. And it would, if I would remember, I was prescribed benzodiazepines immediately when it happened to me, with also antipsychotics, because they didn't believe me that the Accutane did this. I just took the benzos, drank beer, smoked a joint, anything that I could to just escape and sleep. And it's not because you're weak or an irresponsible person. It's just the burden, right, that this has. It's just impossible sometimes to withstand. So basically, when you started drinking, you were already on several medications, right, dealing with their issues. So that's why you went into alcohol. Then you just try to clean yourself up from the alcohol, and then they medicate you again, giving you worse issues like the akathisia and the extrapyramidal symptoms. And then it's just, as you said, yeah. Okay.
So I did move to another job, which also the same thing happened. I lost that job. A year and a half ago, maybe a little less, the myoclonic jerking and all those kind of things got so bad that I ended up at a neurologist who actually I had a lot of trust in. He decided that I had bipolar disorder.
A neurologist decided, the neurologist gave you a diagnosis of bipolar?
Yes. So he put me on Lamictal. He warned me about the side effects of the rash. He said, only 0.4% of people will get anything like that. So I was on the medication for a week or two. And I had been, walking around all day, and I was like, my feet they really hurt. So I took my shoes off. I had blisters all over my feet, which then spread pretty much over the rest of my body. So it was the beginning of Stevens-Johnson syndrome, which has a very high mortality rate. So I was absolutely terrified. And there's nothing they can do. He had me stop the medication and basically said that if it started moving to my mucous membranes, such as my mouth, or I needed to go to a hospital with a burn unit. Luckily, that didn't happen, but I can't even tell you. It was so, so painful. At the same time, that medication gave me the worst akathisia. Thought I was going crazy. So I had this rash going on. I was, running around my house, inside, outside, crying, screaming, rage. I thought I was dying. I thought I was going to die. There wasn't any stopping it. There was nothing they can do. Nothing they can do. I just had to wait for it to pass. And
at no point in time did they tell you, listen, let's try to devise a protocol to get you off all these substances, see what's doing what? Because when you see your patient's history, going from doctor to doctor, going through all these different medications, God knows what causes what. They didn't think that maybe we should taper off everything, try to see the baseline where it is. I mean, no, just continue taking it despite having
I wish that had happened. I was switched to another drug, oxcarbazine, that's the generic name, which also caused akathisia, but not quite as bad. So I stopped taking that. At this point, the neurologist decided that I didn't have bipolar disorder. I had a seizure disorder.
Just to make it clear, so people understand, neurologists are not qualified to give you a psychiatric diagnosis like that. It's not the first time that I hear that
really
happened. The doctors just leap beyond their professional boundary and just do sometimes whatever the heck they want. So first of all, that's ridiculous in the first place. What we're talking about, how many years already? When from the get-go of 18 till
with the neurologist was last year, so that was almost 20 years.
So 20 years of just struggling continuously, a struggle that began basically when you started taking these meds.
There was no need for it.
Can I ask you, what would you say to people that come up and tell you, well, come on, you don't know it's the drugs, and maybe it's just your issues and you're mentally unwell, and there's something that a lot of people that are injured by pharmaceuticals encounter because it's kind of invisible, right? I mean, you can't really see on the person when you look at them, right? I mean, when I look at you, you seem like a healthy young woman. You don't seem injured in any way whatsoever. So people kind of doubt that. So let me ask you, like, what would you say to these people, first of all? Like, why, how do you know that it's these drugs?
I don't know if there's a good answer to that. I personally, I just know. Other people's stories, it's all very similar. You're actually catching me on a good day. Usually, well, I don't know if you can see my hand shake very badly. This is mild. My jaw will twitch to the side. I actually am chipping my teeth. So those are all also EPS symptoms. I don't know if they're going to go away. They may not. I still have trouble sleeping, and most people, when they say they can't sleep, they mean it took them a couple hours to fall asleep or they woke up early. I go days and days without sleeping 1 hour, 2 hours. I have autonomic nervous system damage, I guess. My blood pressure is up and down. My breathing's dysregulated. My pupils blow up, be huge. Sometimes one stays regular and the other pupil blows up. I sweat. That hasn't been happening as much lately, but just buckets, or I'll get goosebumps out of nowhere. So it took a while to even figure out what that was, but there's really nothing to be done about it.
Something that I wanted to add to this is, when people ask these questions, you tell them, look, I mean, I was normal before, right? I didn't have any issues in my life before I started getting medicated. And second of all, what people don't understand is, look at the inserts. Look at the insert. A lot of these things are documented effects. The problem is that the statistics are skewed and manipulated, and they always say, oh, it's 1 in 10,000, 1 in 100,000. It doesn't happen. Don't be concerned. They dismiss it. I mean, did a physician, from your 20 years of experience with these events, were you ever sat down with an insert and had this physician explain to you the risks you're about to take when you're taking these medications?
No, the only time I was warned was about the Stephen Johnson's rash, the
That'll make sense.
possibility of that. Yeah, that's it.
Oh, wow. It's just,
Currently, I've switched Zoloft at some point, and I'm terrified to come off of it. It doesn't do anything for me. I don't need it, but the withdrawal terrifies me. Just the akathisia was just the worst thing I've ever gone through in my life. I wanted to die. I didn't want to die, but I didn't want to deal with that pain for one more second. Somehow I made it through that, and I'm afraid that even reducing the dose of the Zoloft may trigger that again. So I'm kind of accepting the fact that I may have to stay on that drug for the rest of my life. Just take that pill every day just so I don't get sick.
so right now, how many medications are you on? So Zoloft and anything else?
I take Zoloft, Trileptal, Vimpat. I have Valium as a rescue for if the EPS symptoms start up again. And I have propranolol for the akathisia, which I don't take. I'm not sure it ever worked anyway.
So basically, you're caught up in this almost impossible situation where you want to come off, but you're just afraid to do that because the withdrawal is just can just be devastating.
Yeah. I don't know. As I mentioned, I'm unemployed right now. I would love to be out there working, but I don't know how I'm going to feel day to day. If any of these side effects crop up, I don't know how the rest of my life's going to look.
Did you try to look into facilities that help people go and withdraw in a safe manner from all of their psychiatric medications?
I didn't know places like that existed.
Yeah, I guess they're not funded and they're probably expensive. But I know that in Israel, for example, I'm originally from Israel, there's a program that they recently started doing there to try to help people withdraw safely. And also they kind of teach healthcare professionals, mental health professionals, how to properly, I would say, withdraw patients. But again, what they're not saying is that sometimes, me from looking at what other victims are saying, so for people are not aware that are watching this right now, you can just go on Facebook. If Facebook has still not completely censored all these groups, because this is something that is happening right now. We're dealing with a lot of censorship when it comes down to any group criticizing the pharmaceutical industry. But you can see for yourself, guys, everybody watching this, thousands of people describing withdrawal symptoms that last for years. And that's something that is not really acknowledged by the psychiatric community. It seems like one hell of it's just pure hell. Like people just are not managing to come off, even though they know that the drugs are not helping them, but they kind of are stuck in this trap. And they don't know what to do. But I guess, again, my advice to you would be to look into that, because you might find a place that I don't know the expenses. I'm not from the US, but eventually, I mean, let me ask you, what's your goal? How would you like to see yourself 5 years from now?
I would like to be a functioning part of society again. Working, enjoying my life. Yeah. I don't know if that's a possibility, but if I could look into, the places you just mentioned, that would be amazing if I could find something like that, because I think it could change my life around.
Yeah. So there you go. Like, again, it's just so sad for me to see this, because again, as someone who experienced drug injury himself from a completely different compound, but this story, do you think what happened to you is rare, or is this more common than people are led to believe, that going on these medications are just,
absolutely. It's sad, but it's true.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's far too common, and as you said, warnings are not given, and you don't know what you're getting yourself into. So what would you say to people if they're right now embarking on a quest to improve their mental health, and they're confronted with a decision whether to go on these drugs or not? Why would you say?
I would say educate yourself before you make any decision. If it's like I had mild anxiety, mild depression, maybe consider some kind of therapy, counseling first, that you know is not going to harm you. Of course, there are
things at first. For example, when you went to your primary care, didn't tell you, did you try exercising? Did you try meditating? Did you try none of these things?
No. And of course, I do believe there are some people who are very ill, maybe schizophrenia. I don't know much about it, but whose lives can be improved by medication. Of course, they will have side effects as well. So I'm not saying nobody should ever consider taking medication, but I think people need to be educated.
And we're not being educated properly about the risks, are we? We're not being properly informed about these treatments. And something else that we'll be doing on this channel as well, and I hope you'll tune in to see more, is that we're going to also talk about the studies, about the data, and about the fraudulent research that has been made about the efficacy of these drugs. Because a lot of the so-called scientific evidence that doctors use to back up their claims are faulty to begin with. And people are not aware of that because people, from what I see, when you try to raise awareness about a certain medication being dangerous because you've experienced something like that. I don't know if you've encountered that, but I've encountered personally a lot of resistance, a lot of sometimes blind hate if you try to warn people. For example, that Accutane, the drug that I took, could be really harmful. And people tend to dismiss you, and they just a lot of them put very blind faith in their doctors. They would say, well, if the drug can cause these issues, it wouldn't be on the market now, would it? Yeah. You would think, right? But it's not.
Yeah.
It's not what's happening, unfortunately. Anything else that you would want to add, to share with us?
If anybody's watching this who has experienced the same thing, same kind of symptoms, harm, I just hope they know they're not alone. There's tons of us out there. It's sad, but I hope something's done about it.
What would you like to see that could have changed? What would you like to witness happening when it comes down from our governments, from our health administrations?
I would like the information to be out there. I mean, how many people really read those little inserts? And even if you do, for example, on a lot of the medications I've taken, it says one of the risks is movement disorders. That in no way describes the EPS symptoms. It makes it sound pretty mild, unless you know what movement disorders are.
So people are not getting the appropriate information from their physicians.
No.
That's
I'd love to see these really harmful drugs removed from the market.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's something that is very hard to do. Some of these drugs have been hurting people for decades, and unfortunately, prescription rates are just increasing, and it's just become something. I think society is so brainwashed that people are just accepting it as something.
Yep. Doctors are God.
Yeah. It's become, medicine is sort of an orthodoxy a lot of times, and if you question it too much, you're ridiculed for that.
Absolutely,
yeah. And it's not. People are listening to this. It's not just the psychiatric drugs. It's many other medications, very common prescriptions that your folks may be taking, people around you, family members. For example, very common prescription statins, something that we'll be discussing in this channel as well, that people take to lower cholesterol levels, are also causing great harm to countless people. People need to be aware of that. And I thank you, first of all, very much for coming here, being brave, showing your face, and telling us what was it like being handled by the psychiatric community? And as a whole, you would say a bad experience, right? Not a
Very bad experience. Yes. Terrible.
terrible experience. I really hope that you will be able to find some remedy and some answers to how to properly withdraw from these compounds and to find yourself, as you said, in several years from now, in a much better place where you are more functional, where you feel that you're again a contributing part to society, and you can just be happier. And I know that it's really hard. For me also, it's been quite the journey, and I've been trying constantly to figure out how to manage my symptoms and what things to use to make my day easier. And I've been finding here and there some things that help alleviate some of my problems. Yeah, I guess my message is also like, don't give up. I know life changes very profoundly after something like this, but we always have to hold on to hope and purpose and stay strong.
Well, thank you very much for listening.
Of course. Thank you so much for coming. I wish you the very best.
You as well.